Part 2, and the question is that Part 2 stand part. This is a debate on clauses 6 to 9. Are you seeking the call?
Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr. Chairman, that's got to be the first time that people have thought that I've spoken too quietly. This is extraordinary. I think that's worth recording in Hansard's this evening. So I am wishing to take a call on Part 2 of the Inquiries Bill, and as you quite rightly pointed out, this covers just clauses 6, 7, 8 and 9, and they're pretty operational in a way, but there are just a couple of points that I want to bring to the attention of the House. The first, in clause 6, relates to the types of inquiry, and this was discussed in relation to the purpose of the bill as well, but it's obviously relevant to Part 2. The purpose of this legislation is to look at the sorts of inquiries that we are able to set up in New Zealand, the scope of them, their rights, their privileges, their ability to call witnesses, etc. And this part 2, goes further into that area. Let me give you an example. So it specifies the types of inquiries that can be undertaken under the Act. Royal commissions established under the authority of letters patent, constituting the office of the Governor-General, public inquiries which are established, government inquiries which are established. The Governor-General, by order in council, can establish a public inquiry for the purpose of inquiring into and reporting on any matter of public importance, and a minister can, just by a Gazette notification, establish a government inquiry, again for the purpose of inquiring into and reporting on any matter of public importance. I know that there are a few sort of jokes about different political parties about the number of inquiries that some parties might like, or the number of royal commissions that other parties might call for, but from my perspective, I actually think that it's a really important part of our democratic process, and that's why this bill, and in particular actually the specificity that's outlined in Part 2, are so important to the operations of our democracy. If people see a situation that happens and feel that it's something bad, it could be just, something quite minor but bad, or something really, really serious and tragic and bad. People in a robust democracy want to know what happened and why. And often that is not possible through our standard parliamentary processes. A select committee, for example, may institute an inquiry, but again, we don't have, within the select committee process, don't have the ability either through expert witnesses or references, or the ability to call witnesses, require people to come under oath. They may not be the appropriate bodies to get that element of truth. And of course, I think that it's still quite unfortunate, but it still happens despite our MMP environment, that sometimes select committee inquiries become opportunities for political grandstanding, and I think that's actually a rather disappointing outcome of an inquiry, because they really should be the opportunity for members of different parties to look at a particular issue of concern, hear the facts and work together to see if a problem can be resolved or information can be brought to light and shared for the betterment of our citizens. So in that first section in Part 2, Clause 6, it talks about those different types of inquiries that can be instigated under the Inquiries Bill. And then in the next clause, in Clause 7, it talks about the specific matters to be specified in the instrument establishing the inquiry. So what sort of matters can be discussed and what sort of inquiry would be appropriate? And then the rest of this part, Mr. Chairman, is primarily operational. It talks about whether a member of a public inquiry can be removed from that office, and under what circumstances, what happens if there's a vacancy, somebody resigns or for some other reason can't continue. So I think that this is a really important part of the bill, because it does really explain how the purposes in Part 1 are going to be operationalised. Mr. Chairman, I was reflecting on the earlier contribution about why this bill has taken so long. We know the serious and good reason that it's come before the House right at this very time, and that's because of the Fonterra issues, and I'm totally supportive of the light being shone on all aspects of that concern so that we can give ourselves and people overseas buying our products complete confidence about the safety of our exports. But I did wonder what has been the cause of the delay between 2009 and, Mr Chairman?
Honourable Ruth Dice.
What has been the cause of the delay between 2009 and now? And I might be a little suspicious, it might be just the political part of my nature unusually coming to the fore, but I do think that the reason for so long that the government has delayed this bill being progressed is that there have been so many issues in the last 5 years of the National-led government that deserve an inquiry where people in this Parliament and people outside of this Parliament, members of the public, voting, thinking, challenging, respected citizens in our society have said, how can this happen in our country? Why can't we have an inquiry? Or more importantly, why isn't there being an inquiry considered? And any of these forms of inquiries outlined in Part 2 would have been appropriate. One that is a very recent occurrence is the deal that the government did over Sky City, where there are all sorts of unknown elements, where there's stories about the deal that the Prime Minister did with Sky City over dinner, where a lot of my constituents I know say to me, how is that possible? How is it possible that the laws of New Zealand would have been traded away over a dinner, a casual dinner, and the next thing we have legislation being pushed through to change our laws in response to a deal? In many countries and in comparable situations, that action would have triggered an inquiry of some sort. Now, I have to say that I doubt if it would be a ministerial inquiry. I very much doubt if the Minister of Internal Affairs, who I think is responsible for actually this very legislation, even though last night I know there was some confusion, Nathan Guy was speaking to the bill. He thought he was in charge, and then the Honourable Trevor Mallard drew to the House's attention the fact that when the bill had been published, it was in the name of another minister, the Honourable Chris Tremaine. So then the Honourable Nathan Guy apologised and said, well, it is in his name, so I'll speak on his behalf. But then the Speaker notified the House that actually the bill was in the name of the Honourable Nathan Guy, who hadn't noticed that.
But he's still notwithstanding that he was said on behalf of Chris Tremaine.
Well, if he should have said on behalf of Chris Tremaine, I think we may need an inquiry into who is responsible for this legislation, because I am completely puzzled. I am very confident that it's not the Honourable Simon Bridges who's in the chair, because if he was in charge of this bill, he would know something about it. He would have taken a call, he would have contributed to the debate, I'm sure, because he's not short on coming forward on these matters, as I've noticed in other debates in the House. So that, Mr Chairman, welcome to the debate.
Thank you.
The instance of the Sky City deal, where our legislation was basically traded away by the Prime Minister over dinner with representatives of Sky City. So there's a convention centre being built in Auckland, but it's in exchange for hundreds more pokey machines being allowed by Sky City against our current regulatory regime. And in some situations where the Deputy Auditor General actually looked at that issue and said that the contract to build the convention centre was flawed, it was not transparent, it was not even-handed, it established and demonstrated deficiencies on the part of both ministers and officials. That's quite serious stuff. And in some countries, I know that there would be a call and it would be responded to for an independent inquiry. No such inquiry has been triggered by the government, and I think that's a shame. The whole country knows that that was a shonky deal, but we don't have a process where that sort of debate can be triggered. So I think, Mr Chairman, in fact, that even though this is good legislation instigated by the Honourable Annette King, introduced to this House by the Honourable Rick Barker, went to a select committee chaired by the Honourable David Parker and with Grant Robertson as the junior member from Labour on that committee. Good legislation, well considered. I'm not sure, and I'd like to hear from one of the members of the then Government Administration Committee or the Minister in charge of the bill, whoever he may be. I would like to hear about whether any of those members considers that this bill deals adequately with what I see as a deficiency in the public accountability of the government and the transparency of deals such as the Sky City Shonky deal.
Mr Chair, I call the Honourable Minister.
Mr Chair, I want to take a very